stability is a topic that I would probably push back on a lot of the, we'll say, conclusions in the way that it's described. So, for instance, an exercise just becoming more stable doesn't mean that you're going to have better motor recruitment because, so what influences the motor recruitment? Is it how many things you're recruiting, or is it the actual physics of stability in the exercise?
Like what influences motor
Are
recruitment?
unstable
Well,
exercises harder just because they're unstable, or are they harder because you have to contract more muscle tissue? You have to contract more motor units
yeah,
systemically to do
it
that.
would be the latter, right? It's gonna
Okay.
like increase your perception of effort. So,
So let's take a dumbbell press versus a machine press. Which of those is more stable?
I mean, a machine, right?
So the
Like,
machine is more stable. Okay. You don't have to balance the dumbbell, right?
yep.
But do you think that we actually isolate the motor recruitment more to the pecs in a machine versus a dumbbell press?
I mean, if it's more stable and it decreases your, I mean, yeah, I would say so.
Okay, that is not true. Okay, so here's why.
Oh,
So when you have a fixed handle, so it's a machine, it's a handle that can't move, right? You grab it and it's got a fixed arm path. What that does, even though it's stable, it's a controlled arm path, it allows me to apply forces in more directions and at more joints than I can with a dumbbell. So with the dumbbell, I have to balance the dumbbell because if the dumbbell
yep,
falls
yep.
back,
Oh,
or
I think
if
I
my
see.
arms go
I
out,
think I see where
etc.
you're getting at. Like somebody can like force, I guess, other muscles
So
to do it, right?
you're gonna see more recruitment in the triceps and the
Yep,
delts.
yep.
You're gonna see more distribution totally in that thing. So if we're comparing an exercise, so a dumbbell press versus a machine press, we both have a back support. So if we're just
Yep.
basically looking at from the pecs distally and the muscles that are going to be involved in that, right? Like there's not going to be any more torso or leg involvement in either. We'll say it's all the same once we get beyond the pecs, right? In a machine press, I can leverage more muscular tissue because I'm not having to follow the constraints of balance. So the actual drive to my pecs in this case has to deal with greater motor recruitment systemically across me being able to use more triceps, more delts, and more of each respective muscle in that condition because it's a fixed path, right? So if you take, for example, a leg press exercise, right? In a leg press, you can push like you're trying to push your toes up into the plate, and that creates friction as a resistance so you can like get the quads more. In a squat, we can't do that because if we were to use more of one muscle than was appropriate, we would fall over. So
I
this is the
mean,
same thing. It's just that the dumbbell would go in a wonky place rather than us falling
yep,
over.
yep. But what do you think would take more motor recruitment away from what you're trying to train, though? Is it like that friction, or would it be the instability and having to balance the dumbbells or balance the bar? Like, which
Well,
one would take more
so
motor recruitment away from what you're trying to?
so if the balance skill, like, and again, these things exist on a gradient, right? Because we can have a machine that is a fixed path, but it's a converging versus a straight. Like, say we had a machine where you could rotate the handles, but they go in one direction or something like that. So there are, we'll say, there's a spectrum in both of these categories. But if we stick to this example of a dumbbell press versus a machine press, I would say we're going to have the motor recruitment is going to be more systemic in the machine press than the dumbbell because balancing a dumbbell in a dumbbell press is not that challenging. And the act of balancing it, what it actually does is it limits how much work I'm doing with the surrounding tissue. So if I overcontract my triceps in a dumbbell press, that dumbbell dumps out, right? If I, overcontract one part of my pec or something more, my arm path would change and I would lose the movement. So essentially, what balance does is it says, hey, we have to limit actually how much these other things are contracting so that we only do this one path of motion where we have balance. Whereas in the machine condition, it's like, hey, we can utilize as much of these other things as possible because they're all still going to help produce force that contributes to the movement. Now, this relationship does not exist across every exercise comparison. So in this comparison, we're just talking about, all right, we're stabilized from here. But what if we were to go from comparing a machine press to a standing cable press? where now one exercise is incorporating the whole body and the other one's not. And then you have like how much weight can you counterbalance, etc. So there are conditions where, hey, adding stability will help decrease systemic motor recruitment so that we can get more motor recruitment focused on the thing that we're trying to train. But there are also conditions where when we add stability, we actually increase our ability to use other muscles and have a more systemic motor. So basically, we're less likely to get to the same level of stimulus threshold in the prime mover. Like the chest is less isolated in a machine press than it is in a dumbbell press if we base it off of just how much motor recruitment is going to the chest compared to everything else. So if you take the stability principle too far, you throw an exercise like dumbbell press out because you're just like, well, it's less stable than machine press. And would you disagree? That's like a rampant message on social media right now where everybody's like, oh, this exercise is more stable, therefore better. Because
I
that
mean, yeah,
seems,
definitely.
yeah. And that's not always the case. Like not even close.
Well, I think it also depends how coordinated you are on the exercise too, right? Like, for
Well,
example,
that
you
that
give
applies
a,
to both things. So it's false to assume that coordination isn't applied to a
yeah,
machine
of
exercise.
course.
Because when you start doing a machine, guess what? You're going to get better at utilizing your triceps in that machine, your delts in your machine. You're going to get better at utilizing every tool you have available, right? Now, you will be more efficient in terms of using things that have get better leverage, but especially as you get closer to failure or higher loads, which you guys like to work at high intensity ranges in the science-based community now. So basically you're going to be recruiting everything that can contribute, right? And you're just going to get better at recruiting all of those things. How many times do you see somebody do a machine press and you see like the elbows doing this little shaky thing, etc., right? That is the body trying to coordinate what it's applying force to in that fixed thing. In a dumbbell press, right? If you were that uncoordinated in a dumbbell press, it would severely limit you. So coordination is going to be a factor in both of these things. It doesn't make one more favorable than the other. It's just the motor pattern you're kind of adapting to is very different. One, you're learning how to apply more force efficiently to this fixed object and this fixed plane of motion. The other, you're learning how to apply force while maintaining the balance of this thing.
I see. But I like, of course, there's still going to be coordination demands in both, but I feel like there's definitely going to be more in one than the other, right? Like, for example, a chest press compared to a dumbbell press. Would you agree? At least when you start out
When you
in
start
both of them.
out,
You know, if you
so
got a guy and like you one per like two new people, this is the first time of them doing either one, right? I
mhm.
feel like you would definitely have more like you give a beginner like a dumbbell press, like I feel like you know they're kind of all over the place, right? Compared to somebody that's more trained and more coordinated, then that I'd say that you have a bit more of an argument there, right?
So the question is, are we confusing what we see on the outside for a effect of what's happening on the inside? So if somebody is in a constrained movement and they're not coordinated, it doesn't look much different than when they are. We don't visibly see it, right? So if somebody's doing a hack squat or a pendulum squat and they have a poor squat pattern, it's not going to show up because the machine basically just is like, you got to move like this. So same thing with the machine press, right? If I have somebody in there now, somebody really uncoordinated, if you take these, what you will see is you'll see a lot more elbow movement. You'll see people like elevate shoulders and do all sorts of stuff too, right? At that point in time. But how much they can move, it's constrained by the machine. That doesn't mean the coordination challenge is less. What it does mean is they're able to complete repetitions that are too far away from the standard or more far away from the standard than what they would be able to do with a dumbbell. So basically, when they reach the point where they would be unable to perform the exercise because, you know, they're getting too out of position or they're going to drop a dumbbell on their face or something, right? In a machine, they can keep doing weird stuff and keep doing the machine, right? So their elbows can be misaligned, their shoulders can be, you know, out of place, their torso can move, like they can do all sorts of compensation and still move the machine, and the machine's going to move the same way. In a free weight exercise, we can't do that. So we're kind of confusing the terms of like, yes, it's more, there's a greater balance challenge in a dumbbell press, right? And
Mhm.
visibly, we will see the compensation deviations more because the movement is open chain, right? So basically, because one end of the movement can freely move, those compensations are going to be very visibly present. In a machine, those compensations are going to be harder to see visually because it's closed and basically the path of motion is predetermined. That doesn't mean that we don't see deviations in the chain in between that, right? But in terms of the nervous system's actual challenge, right, it's not that one is necessarily more or less of a, and again, these things are going to exist on a spectrum and there would be some individual things. So if the argument is for a beginner, should you have them do a machine because there's a skill component to a dumbbell press? We're basing that skill purely on how we visibly gauge that, right? But I would say, and having worked with tons and tons of people, there's a skill of working with machines too. It's just easier to hide deficiency in skill and good motor control in a machine. Basically, it just changes the visual. So if I had somebody, they said they wanted to grow a big chest, I think it's worth developing the skill of a dumbbell press because I think that's going to be a valuable tool. And there are many places where I can say this is going to be superior to a machine press. Now, that's not, I don't like to put like this exercise best in this exercise because I think you have to look at the totality of a program. Because if I actually want to train my chest and my triceps at the same time, then yeah, the machine is the better place to do that than a dumbbell press. Right. So it really kind of looks like, well, how much at time, how many exercises, what other exercises I'm going to doing, what machines do I actually have? Because, okay, I have a dumbbell press that's going to have a certain resistance profile. It gives me certain options in terms of inclination and arm path. My machine may be like, okay, cool, this is a machine, it's stable, but the arm path may be awful, right? Or the resistance profile may be awful. So again, I don't like to put an absolute one over the other, but I definitely think that if we were just to look at this in a vacuum and be like, okay, which one's going to be better for just getting more neural drive to the chest? I would say the dumbbell press is likely to be that if we kind of get to the same level of proficiency in both things. Now, is there going to be a huge difference? What if somebody learns to use a machine and they develop the skill of limiting how much they push with their triceps, right? Then do we start to lean in favor of the machine? Possibly, right? So can we learn to utilize the machine without overcompensating with that? Now that becomes harder as we get closer to failure, because basically our ability to change exercises with intent only happens at more moderate resistance, like or moderate intensities and further away from failure. As we get closer to failure at higher intensities, basically our body's just got to use everything it can, right? So this is again then where like, okay, in what conditions I won't always go to the same intensity rep range or to the same degree of failure if I was actually trying to maintain a certain bias. So if I wanted to, for example, let's just get off the chest and make a topic that everybody was always interested in, which is glutes, right? If I was to have somebody do a leg press for growing their glutes, if I have them take a glute dominant leg press with like a high foot position and stuff, really close to failure, what we see is they basically start just using more of their quads at the end because that's the only way for them to continue getting reps. So it's very hard to like try and push close to failure without just letting more and more quads come into the exercise. This is a case where it seems to make sense that we might do more sets with some RIR than fewer sets with failure here if our goal is to keep this exercise glute biased.
So I want to go back to your, press example real quick. But what if you were to just, instead of, being locked into this example of presses and stuff, how about what if you just did a fly? Because then you're not going to have that issue with the triceps. And yeah, you could just like, you just do a fly instead, single joint, you're not going to run into that issue. I guess you could say a pec deck versus a dumbbell fly.
Right. If we're doing the arm extended, we exchange the tricep for the bicep. So it's not, so basically we're still loading across
yeah,
two
I guess you could
joints,
say it's not,
right?
I guess you could say
Yeah.
that's one thing
So,
with single joint exercise. They're not always single joint because they're still
yep.
technically torqued to the
So
elbow, right?
yeah. So we still have to have motor recruitment in the biceps, right? Or the elbow flexors to stabilize the elbow, and in turn the shoulder as well, right? So most people don't realize that the biceps and triceps, like they actually work to help keep the shoulder capsule tight. That's part of their function. So if we eliminate them in things like shoulder adduction and extension type motions, etc., there's the argument of, is that better or worse if I'm eliminating a muscle that was basically designed to help keep joint integrity, which is an argument of maybe against the cuffs in some scenarios. So even though we're isolating the joint, are we essentially taking away some of what the natural stability is for that joint? I can make that argument both ways. Again, there's a lot of this stuff where it's like, if we think about the whole picture, we realize that it's less certain than we think it is.
I mean, let's say, what if you did those like padded pec
Hmm.
decks, or like you got
Yep.
or like you got the cuff and you put it like above
Hmm.
your elbow?
Yep.
Like, how about
So
that? Because then you're moving those.
it, again, sometimes I'm going to guess, and I want to preface that this is a guess, right? So if we remove the elbow joint entirely, okay, it should be less systemic motor recruitment. Should be, I think. But I'm not sure, because by removing the biceps, it does change how much work the rotator cuff muscles and things might have to do to stabilize the glenohumeral joint while we're doing the exercise. I don't know for sure that one trade-off is bigger than the other in terms of the amount. Like, it's like if I remove the biceps, but that increases the coordination and recruitment demand of other muscles that basically take over the shoulder stability role during that. And a lot of people, like, they don't look at biomechanics at this level. They look at just the big things that hypertrophy and they want to grow. And they don't
Mhm.
understand how it's like, okay, how are things changing in terms of shear at the joint? Like, for example, if you do a bicep curl and we have an EMG on your elbow flexors and your elbow extensors, you will see that the triceps also engage to stabilize the joint. If we were to do that deep and look at all of the muscles of the forearms and stuff, you would see it's not working in isolation. Now, a lot of these things are working at, we'll say, a magnitude that shouldn't really interfere with our training effect and our RPE very much, but they are contributing to the integrity of the joint, right? And if we do anything that makes that more challenging, what does it do to our injury risk? How does that affect our RPE? Because, like, does the motion feel wonky or unstable at a particular portion, et cetera? So if I had to guess, I would say slightly in favor that if we shorten, yeah, we would, but not certain, because it's a really complex equation understanding how those joint mechanics change when we eliminate one of the muscles that was very, very strong at helping hold that joint together.
Yeah, I see.
We don't have to make this a super technical conversation. I just wanted to bring up an example of where we can't just say an exercise more stable, therefore better motor recruitment. Can you at least follow me that far? The more specific we get, basically the more uncertain I'm going to be in a lot of these things, because I'm just trying to guess on the biomechanics, and the more nuance we get, the more complicated that becomes.
It does open more perspective to it, right?
Mhm.
It does open more perspective to just taking into account all these other things like with friction and things like that. But yeah.